so let's go ahead and kick this off. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone joining us today. My name's Sean Massey. I am one of the board members for the World of EUC. Joining us today is Janna White and Patrick Coble. So Janna, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Janna.
Yep, I'm Patrick Coble, one of the nerds too.
Yes, I'm also one of the board members. I was wrangled into this group of nerdies over here. So thank y'all for inviting me to this.
So just to get started, today's session is going to be what's new in VDI. Now, unfortunately, we had a last minute change in presenters. Marius had a last minute family emergency and he will not be able to join us today. But between me, Patrick, and Janna, I think, we can roll forward with this and still give you a great discussion and some great content about what's new in VDI and where the EUC space is going. So is there anything else, I think, before we move on to the next slide, Janna, that you want to add as part of your introduction, or Patrick, that you want to add?
I'm good.
All right.
Yeah, I think everybody's going to know us pretty well after all these webinars. So
that is true. So with that, we also want to thank our founding partners and our channel sponsor, iGel, Goliath Technologies, Liquidware, Nerdio, NextThink, Nutanix, and Tenzig are our founding partners. And then Choice Solutions is our channel sponsor. So thank you to all of our partners and our channel sponsor for making this happen. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. And for everyone who's attending today, if you're not familiar with any of these partners, please check them out and tell them World of EUC sent you.
yes, thank you.
So, and then for everyone who's here, if you want to stay to the end, there will be a chance to win our fabulous World of EUC shirt with our logo on it. These are really nice t-shirts, and you'll see all of us today on the webinar. We are wearing World of EUC branded merchandise.
Yay.
So yeah, stay to the end, and you'll have a chance to win one of these shirts to show your support for World of EUC. So, and with that, so I think this is where we move into our conversation.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
I think the simplest thing in here is in the late 80s and then when we got into the 90s, there was only like one show in town. That was the Citrix, right? And then
What was it called back then?
Yeah. And then in 2008, when VMware got in there, plus a couple others shortly after, between there and those next couple years. And now I think we've had 2 or 3 VDI broker or solution startups in just the past couple of years. So I think we're above 10. And if you haven't seen the chart over there, the hexagrid that Ruben made, this is showing you all those different vendors and all those different spaces. Yeah. WinFrame life was a lot simpler. I agree, Roxanne, for sure. It was good. Phone lines made cool noises back then. We don't have those cool noises anymore when we're connecting to things. But we have more options right now than we've ever had in the VDI world.
I think thanks to COVID, right?
Yeah. A bunch of them started off from there, and it feels like it's also one of the other things that I think drove it is to have more, is that if anyone can say the word AI or ML or something like that, and then say something after that, then companies will throw money at them. So some of these startups have happened because of that kind of funding. And then if they're saying cloud native and all that, then that really joins things together there.
Yeah.
So I think that's our tough problem for most, is that there's more options. And so what are you going to do next is going to be the big question, because there's way too many. And I know every client that I work with, that's their biggest question is what's next? What do we need to do? And especially people that hold licenses in those legacy incumbents, with Citrix and VMware, waiting to see what the next chapter is for them. And then I know, Janna, you've messed with a lot with the Microsoft side,
Yeah.
and some of that stuff's been going. And I think it's a real contender now. It might not have all the features as some of the others, but it definitely can do a lot. And there's definitely very large deployments of it, that are living the dream and chugging the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, especially if you're already in the M365
Yeah,
platform.
like if anybody, I think if you're anybody that has more than a E2, E3 license, and then depending on what you've been doing for the operating system, then it really makes sense to go to the Microsoft 365 SKU and then get that, and then easily add it on from there.
Yeah, especially with the licensings.
Yeah, and I think we have a whole slide just on that, which is like
yeah.
right after this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think, you know, you mentioned COVID and, you know, AI as drivers of some of the technology, but even if you go back, you know, 5-10 years before COVID, we were already starting to see a lot of new players come along, because of the cloud and because the legacy solutions weren't designed for the cloud. And it's really interesting to see how this is all played out, because there was a period where there was a lot of choice in certain parts of the ecosystem. I think it was profile management, where there was like 20 players at one time outside of Citrix and VMware.
Yep.
And then they all got consolidated down to like 2 or 3. I think, what was it? Avanti bought up
Res.
of those
Yep.
companies.
Those
Yeah,
are
they
the
bought up
big two.
Res and
Yep.
a few others. And so now it's like Liquidware is, you know, one of the big players that's still independent in the profile space.
Yep.
And a lot of the other good technologies got bought up into VMware, Citrix, Microsoft bought FS Logics. So there's, you know, some of that choice kind of got consolidated into platforms. So, you know, it's like if you follow an ecosystem, you know, some of those choices have been made for you in some ways, but you still have the option to obviously pick a third party.
Right.
But with all this too, right now, with all these new brokers coming along, it kind of creates this interesting paradox of choice. And I know the hexagrid diagram that you put up here on the slide is a bit of an eye chart for everybody who's looking at this from home. I do recommend you check out the hexagrid. Ruben did a great job of creating a graphic that kind of highlights many of the major players in the different parts of the EUC space. But it's really interesting to see kind of how, you know, some of these new players have come in and how they're solving very specific problems, right? You see, you know, certain players building solutions for specific clouds. Sometimes the cloud providers themselves are building solutions for their cloud. And then others who are trying to build solutions that are hybrid and multi-cloud. So you really have to know what you want to do, because otherwise, yeah, you're going to get paralyzed by all that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And well, that goes back to kind of just the basics. I remember back in the 2009-10, it was kind of analysis paralysis of when people were like, oh, I want to do Citrix or I want to do VMware, put them head to head. This one can do that. This one could do that, and goes back and forth. And so then you're like, you had only really 2 options, but you had all these features that were saying you should go this way or you should go that way, and not even counting the cost, right? Because let's go to the next slide, because I think that's really where a lot of things are going on right now, which is all these licensing changes.
But just one quick second, Patrick, just to go back to that point, right? 2009, 2010, right? You had two main players, Citrix and VMware, but Citrix was really good at one side of the equation. VMware was really good at the other. And while they eventually both were able to kind of, do things where like VMware really built their app publishing stack up over the last 10 years. And Citrix had Zen Desktop, but it seems like, their strength in VDI got better. They both kind of ended up having a lot of overlap now, to the point where the differences are really in the margins. And now we have a whole third party around, or I shouldn't say third party, but a whole bunch of players around them that are trying to fill the gaps in more cloud native type features and build on that. So I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the features and stuff like that I think both did everything pretty well on the app side versus there. But yeah, it was a lot simpler times in that sense, where you just had two, and now you have, I think, around 8 to 10, and that's mainstream, either publicly traded or people that have already working with very large customers. And that's saying like people that have 20,000 in desktops or sessions or more, right? Because I think we know that, like, if you just wanted 5 computers, like cloud PC is probably, like, from Microsoft, is your easiest go-to thing, because it would be like next. Now, how much can you customize it? Well, that depends on all those other third-party products. But trying to go get 5 licenses from Citrix or VMware, you could get it from like Workspot and I think Leo Stream and Sonnet.io and a couple others. So you could buy that, but it probably would not be as easy to set up. But then when you get in there, so yeah, I see a whole bunch of people like talking about the price increase of CSP licensing and how it's up 30-40% depending on if you commit to 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. And I think the hard part right now is on a call with a big customer in that 10,000 user mark yesterday. And that was Citrix talking about universal licenses. And that was a tough discussion for them, because it's like, it costs more than what they're already paying. And will they use enough of those features to make it worth it? And it's all based on if they do like a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal. And so when there's only 2 options from one vendor, and I think we're still waiting on VMware and all that to all settle to how many additions or those things, right?
Yes, especially now it's been bought out by, and now they're Omnissa, isn't it now? They're no longer technically VMware.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And I know there's been a lot of people that, I know for me, I like that there's not 10,000 SKUs anymore for Citrix, but then if that one SKU costs 30%, 40% more than all the other SKUs, then that's a real hit to their own market, and makes it very difficult for, life to continue. And now everybody that, I think this is like somewhat analogous to if everyone had bought Exchange back in the day and all you did was pay for renewals, it was super duper cheap per year. And then when you went to Office 365, instead of there being like a large CapEx with a small OpEx, it's all OpEx now, which is the harder money to get. And now when we look at all the main VDI players out there, it's all OpEx. It's all price per user per month. Now, some of them will give you a yearly price, but that's just because they multiplied by 12, right? Everybody wants monthly recurring revenue and not annual recurring revenue, right? They don't want to just get paid once a year. They want to get paid all the time so that their revenue stream is nice and flat as it does everything. So, and these license agreements are real there. You see, yep, the HMC license are simple, very, yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The free net scalers on the HMC licenses, the universal licenses, is massive. Because I think even the way they wrote it, it's 9,999 gigabits of throughput for as many VPXs as you need to do what you need to do. So yeah, for those customers that are going to continue on that path, because even if you compared that to VMware, you would still need to buy a load balancer and especially now, who knows what that's going to be, because you could use NSXT for a while to do some load balancing between your connection servers, security servers, and now your UAGs and all that. But I don't know if they're going to own that product anymore. So you might have to do something different if you go down that road now.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see here, and I'm just continually scanning the questions to make sure we're good there.
All right.
And Sean, you got anything on the licensing changes that you've seen or think about?
I think there's still a lot to be figured out, right? You mentioned the changes with the Broadcom acquisition of VMware, Omnissa, the old EUCBU from VMware spinning out into a new company, and that transition is still going on, and that transaction hasn't closed yet, but there's a lot there that is going to impact licensing, and not just on like the broker or EUC side, but the underlying infrastructure, because almost everybody is impacted by the Broadcom acquisition of VMware. That's changing all the licensing, that's changing all the price increases, or all the pricing. In most cases for customers, it's a significant increase from what I'm seeing and hearing. So, that at the base layer is just a huge change in terms of pricing and building a solution. Then you add your EUC solution on top of it, and that transition from perpetual to subscription revenue, like you mentioned, Patrick, and it's just a lot of change. And it impacts organizations, significantly, because your entire financial model for your IT operations are effectively being changed overnight. Now, there is a good thing in this, I think, in some ways, where in the past, at least in the organizations I've worked with, it's always been hard to figure out, well, what does it really cost for a user? And this move to subscription licensing makes that somewhat easier, because now, at least, here's what the yearly cost is. Here's what it would cost us to, pay for software for everything that this user needs for 12 months. And if for organizations that do chargeback to departments, that does make things a little bit easier, but it also increases the outlay that customers have to pay.
Yeah, and I see a bunch of people talking about AVD in here. As there is definitely, that's a big thing. I've helped do a couple very large deployments that I was like, really? And they're rocking and rolling. And then I know that there's multiple 50,000 plus user deployments across the world, and some of them in the exact same industry. And that to me is impressive. That as AVD, if we thought about RDMI just a couple of years ago, it was definitely kind of just the minimum viable product. It was like just good enough. Maybe Microsoft was like, hey, it's free. And you're like, oh, it is free, minus you got to pay per minute for that VM to be alive. And then that's where like companies like Nerdio have really shined, because they're like, we can actually save you enough money to make this work. But like, its licensing is very, it's the Sarah's got it. It depends, right? It's free, right? Yeah, exactly. But yeah, free minus all that other stuff, right? So yeah.
Yeah, our company basically transitioned from Horizon to AVD, and it's definitely we've had very few issues with the transition, and surprisingly, I think a lot of our users was more satisfied with the AVD solution, and how more streamlined it was for them to connect and things like that. And we didn't have a whole lot of major issues or hiccups on just that transition alone. So
yeah, Yeah, and I mean, are y'all using a couple third parties? Because that's usually what I see
Mhm.
with most AVDs. They've got to use a couple things for, because like if you're using
Especially,
profiles like FS Logics or
yeah.
some other solution, and then something for monitoring and like a control up or a next think or something like that to, and others, Goliath and Liquidware, to see like what's actually going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. We definitely had to implement it with Nerdio.
Yep.
That the management component of Nerdio definitely helped out with the transition, because we were doing a comparison of how we could deploy it, with native Azure versus Nerdio, and it was just like, especially if you're just now learning the platform of the Azure side of it. We had a really a lot to learn, and Nerdio did make it a lot more easier for us to do that, as well as doing updates and managing all the images, and as well as the cost effectiveness of spinning up and spinning down those VMs whenever it's
Oh
as
yeah.
needed.
So, and I think
Yeah.
this is actually a nice transition to our next topic, which is about the cloud and how it's still cloudy. And
Hmm.
Anna, that kind of gives me a question that I have, or brought up a question I have for you, which is, you know, you moved from Horizon to AVD. Was that on premises to cloud?
Yep.
So what was your impact on costs there? Because I know having a data center on-prem, you have a fairly fixed cost model. Moving to a cloud hosted anything brings a whole new cost and operational model, but it also brings with it something we're not used to, which is bandwidth charges and paying, for network bandwidth. And so how did moving your EUC solution to the cloud change your cost model? Because I think that's a big thing customers have to consider when thinking about cloud.
Yeah, it was very difficult to kind of present to our company on that. But ultimately, when at the time we were making the decision was whenever Broadcom had purchased Horizon, the VMware, and at that time we lucked out on getting a contract, basically a 3-year contract, to renew our existing VMware licenses. So we kind of like had enough time to give us enough runway to look at various options and do a cost analysis on all of our options. And we went with ABD because of, not only do we were already an M365 partners, and we were going to utilize the licenses, because you got to think of all the Windows OS licenses and things like that. So it was really more cost effective for us to migrate to that versus other solutions. And then we're still in that transition phase, because we kind of started with a small percentage of our company, and we're kind of like 25-75 right now. So we're still trying to build up our the people that's actually using AVD right now.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
ultimately, we're seeing the cost effectiveness of, because we are trying to transition out of our data center footprint and go to the cloud. And that's still a work in progress for us right now. But we are seeing that it's not too much of a difference if you look at it at a cost comparison between doing a pay-as-you-go versus the CapEx side. So
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think it's like because you were probably in a similar situation that you probably moved before the VMware licensing changes. It's ESX licensing and that type of thing changed, where not just excluding the Horizon deployment, where the cost has went up substantially based on the way they've subscriptions and the number of the CPUs and all that kind of stuff. Because I know that's where the still cloudy is probably still there, is where there's a lot of people that still have on-site deployments. And I see a couple chats going in here that, they're talking about, that there was a customer that had a 3 renewal from VMware.
mhm.
And I personally know there's a couple of them that are like that. And every one of those did not get that renewal and just go, oh, okay, cool, pay it. Every one of them is like, what can we do? And some of it's like buy new host because we can cram more stuff on it. We can renew less. Some are let's move this off that hypervisor. Let's go here. And then I see some mention here of like Azure Stack. And then I see some Nutanix stuff. And it's like, yeah, then that kind of stuff comes in. And I think everyone's holding their breath, waiting on Azure Stack to become something that's affordable for certain individuals, because the last place that I did was a 3-node cluster and it was $300,000. So
Oh yeah.
that's a
Especially
very
for-
expensive thing. And then you still pay per month for the VM too, right? So it's not like, so you had a CapEx investment for the hardware and the software to do it and do all that, but you still have OpEx to just do it and stay cloudy and or cloud-like, I should say. But yeah, it's kind of wild that it's like almost the literal worst year for Citrix to change their licensing plan, VMware to change their licensing plan, and then even with VMware being sold and bought and swapped over and starting all over again, which they're going to hopefully retain a lot of their customer base. But it's like the craziest year of the most licensing hosting changes that there's ever been since inception. Because pretty much like it seems like to me, this is like Fiber Channel and iSCSI was like the thing for a long time, and everyone was battling which one was better for your on-site, VDI deployment and your TTLs and your MTU settings and all this. Like we were getting into the weeds, and all that's being obfuscated by the cloud. And it's just like how much per user per month, and then how much RAM and CPU do you want, and can you get it done in the cloud, or do you need to still stay on site? Because then if you stay on site, then like the AVD story is not as good, and then the Citrix story, the VMware story, LeoStream, WorkSpot, Sonnet, all these others that are out there, those really start shining. But then Microsoft still has a big dimmer switch that they can control so much by just saying this is allowed to run here, that's allowed to run there. You can't run Office here, you can run Office there. Windows 10 multi-user here, not there. So, some of those really, really large renewals on the VMware side alone, outside of the EUC space, it's a big deal. And if those companies, if we think about it, the companies that have those giant renewals that are in that, call it, 8+ digit renewals, if they make changes, the industry will follow. Because if they're in the banking space and you're a little credit union, and then you hear that blah, blah bank just went over, you're probably going to go, well, maybe we should. Right. And it's kind of like the FOMO thing. Oh, they're saving that much money by doing that. And, you just wait for like a conference season to go by and people getting to talk about it. Then you're going to hear and go, well, maybe I should. And then maybe you're in the healthcare space, or maybe you're in the retail space. There's so many industries that will follow those giants in each one of those industries. So if they make a change, everyone is listening. And so I think sometimes these big giant software companies forget that everyone else talks to each other, that's smaller or bigger than the customer. And then they're like,
Yeah.
oh, we can
That's
change the price.
Why
no
are we
big deal.
here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And just think about the impact, right? If you have, I'm just going to term it as a whale that looks at the current market and makes a decision on something. Well, that whale is going to, be able to influence the product of their choice to get what they need. And just by doing that, that's going to have a whole drag-on effect of pulling more customers with, because that big customer is going to need backup or monitoring or some sort of integration that's not there in the product, or a certain support model or compliance model, certification, they're gonna the vendor's gonna go for that because they want the business. And if it's a really large customer and a lot of licenses or a lot of revenue, it's going to be worth it to invest it in that. And like, let's, finance, right? You talk about, small credit unions, 5 or 10 small credit unions probably aren't going to make a change. A Bank of America or a Citi or a Chase, that will make the change, and that'll bring everything else along with it to bring those smaller customers. But one other point, Patrick, you made about, the software companies forget that we all talk to each other. There's one exception to that, and you mentioned healthcare. And there's one really big driver in the healthcare industry that is kind of a partner, kind of a customer to the vendors, but then is also somebody most healthcare companies rely on that really drives that industry. And that's Epic. And if Epic says something that they need, the vendors are going to follow that because they know healthcare is going to need it to be able to, upgrade to the latest version and stay on that platform.
Right. Well, yeah, because and then the analogous to it is Cerner, right? Yeah. Is like those two providers of EMR things can really steer the boat of healthcare in general. Because then if you're customer X and you're on the opposite thing that each one of those deliver things on, you may go, well, I want to be on the same thing they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Because I want to be certified. I want to have the same look and feel, the same administration, all that. And so, it's kind of, it makes me feel like in the healthcare world, that's like the Betamax and the VHS, right? Like one of them swaps or both of them swap, everyone's watching, literally, like, and they're getting delivered there. So,
but even take that one step further, right? If Epic says don't use platform X, that's going to drive people to platform Y because they all want to say target platform and save on maintenance. So certain vendors in certain spaces can really drive a lot of change in their customers or in the vendor space because of what they require or demand. And I pick on Epic because for a lot of us in the space who've done consulting or have worked in vendors, they'll probably tell you, stories about, what they've heard from their healthcare customers and what they've had to do to deliver a solution. So, but it fully applies to Cerner and other EMR vendors as well.
Yeah. And I think almost every industry vertical has an application or two that drag the whole thing. It might as well not be like a Titanic. It might as well be like a tugboat, right? Like it's what's pulling that industry from there, and like what that app is. And then that's a good one there too. Sarah's got a good one of like, is it worth ripping out something that's been good for 20 years? And then, pay now, pay later, cry, pay once, cry once kind of thing too, right? It's like, what are you going to do?
But it really depends there, how many zeros and commas are involved in that sum dollars figure as well.
Yeah. And that's where the clouds, I think one thing everyone can unanimously agree on is the cloud is still growing. I don't think it's completely stagnated as an industry. Maybe some of the specific clouds have slowed down in certain areas. But I think the craziest thing for me and Janna, is for you is that some of these giant AVD customers have literally saved millions and tens of millions of dollars a year by just changing the instance type from a V3 to a V4.
Yeah,
like there's so much money to be saved by running the newer instance that's less per month and may actually be faster for the user. And it seems counterintuitive, but then when you look in the data center of that cloud, they've got racks and racks and racks of servers that have this processor in them that are the V3 processor. They got to get them out to get more V4 to get ready for V5. So it's like it's real estate in the data center is what's driving some of that too. And then that you can save money by getting something faster. When you did it if you did it on site, I don't think you could ever say that. You paid more or the same and your new server's faster, but you can't say I paid less per month per user per VM and got more performance. That it's like completely, it completely turns a pyramid upside down. It's like blows my mind.
And that's a transition to the topic of like what is the best on disaster recovery and failover and security. Those are major topic points that you have to look at as well.
Yep. Yeah. And I see a couple of people have already like swapped in our chat of Hyper-V, right? And like, yeah, I didn't have in my bingo card that I would be talking about Hyper-V, Zen Server, and KVM and Red Hat Linux this year. It's always been Nutanix, and then it's been obviously ESX. And so, yeah, Hyper-V is here. Yeah, totally. And so one of the things I put here is security is fun, and there's a lot of security features that are different between every one of these browsers and every one of the brokers and every one of the solutions as a whole. And there's a lot of attacks that had VDI within it, right? If I don't like it's. I think we have to name names, otherwise it doesn't make sense. But if you saw like Change Healthcare had a congressional hearing and talking about it, and like the thing is it came through Citrix. Well, it didn't come through Citrix as in they hacked the planet and broke into it. It was compromised credentials. It just happened to be the access method. If they would have just had a VPN and it was Cisco AnyConnect, that would have been in the incident response, right? Someone compromised credentials, logged in Cisco AnyConnect, and then did their thing. So Citrix isn't to like blame there, but it's all the other security things that are in there. And I see it a lot because this is where I live and breathe all my stuff, but the security features between these is still pretty big. And then a couple of people are saying that too. It's like, Citrix has a lot of security features in its thing, which really helps. And I think unless anyone has any there, we can probably almost skip to the next slide because that really ties into the next thing. And that's because it's all about the features, right? All the features, right? And when you're Swiss Army knife, when we first started out in the late 80s and early 90s of this VDI thing or application delivery control, whatever you want to do it, we only had one blade. It was, I can put mouse clicks and keyboard strokes into a remote computer session. Oh, that's cool. That's all we need. And then over the years were thousands, tens of thousands of features from there.
And I think that just comes naturally, though, with more people adopting the solution and wanting to do more with it, because there was that time, when it was all published apps and you needed a way to manage app settings, and that turned into all these profile management solutions. And then when we got to VDI, non-persistent desktops had the same problem. You had to have solutions to deal with it because you wanted a persistent user session. But also, right, everything has gotten more complicated. Apps have gotten more complicated. The ecosystem has gotten more complicated. So you really need to start laying more and more on top of it. And to that point, security. You need better tools. You need, non-persistent desktops or RDSH servers. And security, you would think, oh, well, we can wipe that server out and take care of the issue. But then you have an incident response person or a security team that's going, well, wait, no, we need to do forensics on that.
Yeah, we need those logs.
How do I keep that? How do I keep that? I'm drawing a blank on the Citrix presentation.
PBS MCS.
What?
The PBS MCS write cache.
Not MCS, the other one where you net boot.
The provisioning server where you got write cache and all that.
PVS, right? How do I do incident response on PVS or instant clones on Horizon? And those are the kinds of challenges that the products have to add features to adapt to, or security solutions to adapt to.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, and I think one thing that's happened is, the competition between all these brokers has made these features really shine and then also be consolidated into everybody. Everybody can do this, everybody can do that. 2 of the 5 or 10 can do this, 3 of the 5 or 10 can do that, right? Like it's just every one of them has to keep it going.
Yeah.
And because features, if we think about when we're talking about the whales and stuff like that of clients, if they say, hey, we want it to do this when I click that, that will happen for those big customers, right? Everybody else may have not wanted that, but over the years, they're like, oh, when did this show up? I had someone that upgraded, just Citrix 1912 to this 2402 that just came out, and they logged into Director and they were like, holy moly, I did not know what we were missing. It's like, yes, there's been hundreds of updates and new fields and things and trends and reports that can be done now that you didn't have before. And then it was the same thing when people went from link clones to instant clones in Horizon. Like, holy moly, it's there. But then some of the really big customers are like, so we can't persist the AD name. We have to make the account. So there was little nuances that annoyed really large clients, but everyone else was like, this thing is just the cat's meow, And so these features, I still feel like there's always a feature battle, but now I feel like it's also just the minimum viable product. Is we've had 20, almost call it 30 years of VDI, 20, 30 years of VDI, depending on when you want to call it, say it started. But most people have the main things, or they buy the other supporting technologies.
And I think that goes back to the point I made earlier, right? Like in the core products, a lot of the differences between like Horizon and Citrix are kind of in the margins now, where it's like, well, we can support Intel GPU and one can. And I'm just using that as an example because it's the first thing I picked up on the slide. But, those things get closed really quick in the differences between the products as well, right? One customer or one product does it within a couple of releases, another will have something similar or an equivalent. But now you look at it, it's not just Citrix or Horizon, and it probably has been this way for 5 to 6 years. It's their ecosystem products. Like Citrix acquired, who is the layering technology?
Unidesk
after VMware acquired App Volumes. Everybody's had their own profile solutions and they've been improving them. Citrix just bought Uber Agent to, improve their observability, whereas VMware's been using Workspace ONE Intelligence and finding ways to use that product.
The vRealize and all that. Yeah.
So there's a lot, I think a lot of that growth is in the ecosystems around the product.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. So let's go to the next one, which I think, kind of like starts wrapping it up, is that, this is the year, year of VDI is what Johan always says, but it's definitely like the year of POC, right? Where you've got to go, if you're a nerd and your company sees those renewals, you've got to go kick the tire of some other thing, and at least run the numbers on the math, but maybe even kick the tires and demo it. You've got to look at the other things because there's so many other players out there. And you may think that you need all these things, but like maybe you just need it to do these 12 things instead of the 200 things that you're being charged for. And so it's not to bash anybody's technology or solution. It's just the reality of, with inflation and money and the cost of things going up and the licensing changes, it's kind of a perfect storm that you really got to, take care of your company and obviously your users, right? And so if we keep clicking a little bit here, then, because there's just so many companies, there's so many licensing changes.
Speaking of, we got a question from Ed Duncan about, comment is curious to know what your thoughts with so many apps becoming SaaS will have on.
I mean, we're also becoming paperless soon too, right? Like SaaSification is definitely happening. But I think if we look at, I think Sean, you had a good one because Epic is doing the same thing, right? They're trying to get to a browser-based version. But what I thought was really funny is they promised a lot of customers like, oh, you won't even need hardly any servers. But then when you actually look at like how much Chrome is using or Edge or whatever, like it's using a substantial amount. Like it's going to be the biggest, baddest web application there ever was to rival Salesforce, right? Like it's a big honky thing. But I think it is going to do it. And then that's where those like enterprise browsers and all those types of things really start shining. So if you're a company that isn't really using a lot of Windows apps, but using a lot of web apps, and you want that consistent control, then it's like, okay, sweet. Then maybe the Citrix, the VMware, or you go down the road, like I think what Palo just bought Talon, and then you still got Island, and you got a couple others that are in that space. Microsoft and Google are trying to be in that browser space, but there's so much going on. So with these SaaS apps, maybe there is going to be less VDI. But then if you pick the right vendor, then it's the same vendor, but you're just doing it a different way, right?
So to build on that, it's, I agree, there could potentially be a lot less VDI, but there's other things you can acquire. And this is going to be probably more of a Microsoft and Omnissa conversation, because now you're moving into more endpoint management. You're moving away from managing that whole desktop experience in your data center and moving to a secure endpoint. Or to Patrick's point, you're looking at one of the many enterprise browser, secure browser solutions out there. Now, I want to go back to one point you had also made about year of the POC. Patrick, and that is for anyone who's out there, right? Maybe your renewals aren't coming up this year, but with all the scuttlebutt about licensing changes and price increases and everything like that, you should be taking the time now to do your due diligence, because at some point you're going to have a manager, you're going to have somebody in your finance team who's going to hear about this and go, well, how do we avoid this cost? How, what can we change to? And by doing your homework, by doing your due diligence, you can either answer those questions and say, yeah, we've looked at these 3 solutions and this might be the best fit and it would save us X, or nobody does what we need, we have to pay the piper. But doing that up front and being prepared means that you'll be able to head off those questions and direct the direction that your organization goes, or the direction that your customers go if you're a consultant.
Exactly. And I think, Tarkin's putting a good point in there, is talking about like, if you still got Windows apps, then VDI is still the way, but there's still enough stuff that's been SaaSified that browser really becomes a really starting thing. And then that even goes, what's happened is, so many of these changes are like cascading, because if you said that you're all just browserification, then that's where like, oh, well, maybe like a Chromebook really starts making sense because all I need is this. And so I have a very cheap endpoint. Yes, I still have to pay the piper, per year for that, but I can have a good unified experience and I know it's going to work, kind of thing. But it's
until your users use the Chromebook and go, what is this? Give me my desktop.
Oh, yeah. Well, it sometimes if they touch the Chromebook, that's all it takes, right? Because it's like it's got the quality. I know they've made some really fancy ones now, but you can only have one first impression, right? And that's a tough thing. And we talk about proof of concepts and stuff like that. Like you've got to do, as nerds that are taking care of the things, we have to do the best thing we can to have the best login time we can, best user experience. User profiles are loading, it's snappy, the app opens. Then we got another one from Ryan. Do you feel that the full desktop VDI or SBC is legacy at this point, or in moving towards SaaS, or is most apps, but the line of business apps are delivered through publish apps, whatever? Yeah, I still think there's definitely, I think full desktop's still a big player for some, because it's the simpler solution than just publishing the 1 or 2 apps. But then I also see that there's some places that just need to publish the 1 app, And sometimes those apps are literally just a browser. So then enterprise browser could swoop in our end user computing world and just take care of business.
And it really depends on that use case. Like everything else in EUC, right? The use case is king. And for many, yeah, VDI might be overkill. It might just be good to do a published app or two. But you're going to have a lot of use cases where the application requirement dictates a full desktop, or the business requirement dictates a full desktop.
Now, there's so many dependencies on what that application entails. What it's like needs to have system services or something like that. I've had several instances where, you know, we were trying to use app volumes, but the certain applications just would not work or function as you would have if it was, you know, installed directly. So those are things that, you know, you have to look at, as well as management of those applications as well.
Yeah. And then, I mean, this Microsoft and MSIX and all this stuff kind of starts layering on top of each other, and one solution impacts all the others, you know? And that's where, like, right now, you know, the biggest thing is with all these different companies, all these different licensing changes, it's still running on site or in the cloud. Security is still fun, and you want to battle with the features, but it's like, what do you do next? It's going to be still, it depends. There's not a one size fits all. There really never has been. I think Citrix and VMware have always dreamed about that there would be a one size fits all. But it's just not happened still yet, because every industry, every application is just too diverse still. But there are things that are simplifying things. So, yep. All right, so let's go in. I know we're basically almost at perfect time in here. So what's our next thing here? This is,
Our Q&A.
I think we've been answering questions in real time, so I don't even know if there is any.
There's no question in the Q&A panel, and we've been pulling stuff from chat as we've gone along. So
no problem, Ryan. Thank you.
So
yes.
Up next, June 11th, we have a webinar with our founding partner NextThink, where they're going to talk about zero-touch IT and how to go from reactive to proactive. So we have a QR code up on screen. If we would strongly encourage you to join and check out our partner's solution. And then up next, we also, if you are interested in being a local World of EUC leader, we are in the process of setting up local groups. So for those of you who are involved in CUCG or the VMware user group, we're building up our local group and our local presence. We have a webinar on becoming a local leader, May 31st.
Yep.
And then Sarah.
A few days away.
Yeah, I know.
Sarah Vogt is going to be hosting a Diversity in Tech virtual social hour on June 20th. In the chat, she's saying, bring a beverage if it suits you. We'd love to have you come check it out. Sarah, if you could drop some details in the chat on what you're going to be doing for that virtual social hour, that'd be great. We'd love to see you at both of these events. Going forward, QR codes are up on the screen. Be sure to check them out.
All right, I think we're
Awesome.
almost done to who won the shirt of the day.
Ooh.
Janet, did you see in chat?
Yes, I do, and it looks like he or she is still here. So it's Bear Maring is our
is the shirt
winner of the
chicken
World
dinner for the day.
EUC shirt. So Bear, yay! Everybody give a round of applause to Bear. Yep. Thank you so much for sticking to the last minute, and thank y'all so much for staying with us and talking VDI, shooting the breeze with us on that.
Yep. And then, the main thing here is just remember to, I think everyone here has officially signed up, but make sure you tell your peers and your friends in the EUC space to join up. because there's lots of cool content coming virtually and then locally, right? That leader meeting is really going to spike the punch, and lots of nerdy, cool things are going to start happening all over the world as soon as that event wraps in just a couple days this week. So thank you all for coming for sure. And if you have any questions, you can always email the Herd of Nerds on here, hq@worldofvuc.org, and we will get back with you.
Yep. Get the word out.
Yep.
Need to get more people involved.
All right. Well, cool. Well,
Right.
thank you all for coming, and thank you, Janna and Sean, for doing it. And we will see y'all all soon.
Till next time.
Till the
Thank you
next
all.
time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate it.